The sun in the blazing Sonoran, Arizona was no friend. It was a ruthless tormentor. Each grain of sand felt like a burning ember beneath the exhausted feet of Audrey Thorne, a New York adventurer who just hours before believed she was living the adventure of her life. Now the only adventure was survival. Her rented modified SUV, a beat-up vehicle that had seemed to defy physics until then, lay impotent, its engine smoking and tires deflated, a monument to her abysmal luck amidst the golden vastness. The horizon shimmered with heat, distorting reality and transforming any distant silhouette into a cruel mirage. Her water was running out, and the radio, of course, refused to pick up a signal, as if the desert had decided to cut her off from the world once and for all. The wounded pride from a past romantic disillusionment, which had propelled her to seek freedom and new experiences so far from home, now seemed like a cruel joke. She was independent, adventurous, resilient. Yes, but resilience had its limits when the body and mind began to succumb to despair. A chilling shiver, despite the infernal heat, ran down her spine. Would this be her end, forgotten beneath an indifferent blue sky? It was then that, like a mirage materializing with undeniable force, a retinue appeared on the horizon. They weren't the dusty jeeps she'd expected from a common rescue. It was a sumptuous procession, gleaming luxury off-road vehicles that seemed to defy the sand, followed by men on magnificent horses, the feather plumes on their heads swaying in the wind. In the center, an imposing figure mounted on a black stallion that seemed plucked from a fairy tale led the group. It was Calen Blackwood, the enigmatic and powerful patriarch of the Blackwood dynasty. He rescued her personally, with an efficiency and authority that left Audrey both relieved and profoundly intimidated. Calen's eyes, fey brown so deep it seemed to swallow the light, fixed on her with palpable intensity. It was a gaze that seemed to pierce her soul, a mixture of genuine concern for her weakened state and an almost possessive curiosity that made her swallow hard. She felt a shiver down her spine, a strange sensation that had nothing to do with the cold. This man was no mere savior. He was a force of nature, a leader accustomed to absolute control over everything and everyone, and now his eyes were on her. With a subtle gesture, Calen ordered his men to attend to Audrey's vehicle and escort her to one of his climate-controlled cars. The transition from the sandy inferno to chilled luxury was abrupt, almost unreal. She accepted the water and care offered, grateful, but a voice inside her, the one she had tried to silence since her last heartbreak, whispered a warning. That gaze, that presence, was not that of an ordinary man. There was a veiled promise, a subtle danger, behind her savior's facade. As she was driven away from the desert that had nearly swallowed her whole, Audrey felt the atmosphere of isolation and the inevitability of an uncertain destiny. The car's luxury, the respectful silence of her escorts, all contributed to the sensation of being transported to a world where the rules she knew didn't apply. The Blackwood Mesa Ranch, a domain where millennia-old traditions coexisted with a touch of modernity, but where the patriarch's word was supreme, awaited. And she, Audrey, the New York adventurer seeking freedom, was about to enter it, not as a common visitor, but under the guardianship of a man who already saw her with alarming intensity. The question hanging in the air, as dense as the desert heat, was this rescue a salvation or the beginning of a new form of captivity? She felt like a freshly caught fish, cast into a golden aquarium, yet still not understanding the depth of the waters that awaited her. The desert night's darkness swallowed the SUV that carried her, but the brilliance emanating from the Blackwood estate seemed to defy the vastness of the stars, painting the night sky with a golden glow previously unseen. When the massive gates swung open, revealing an interior that bordered on the unreal, Audrey was enveloped by an explosion of colors, aromas, and sounds that would make any New York adventurer feel like she'd stepped onto the set of an HBO prestige drama, only infinitely more real and grand. Polished marble reflected the intricate designs of exquisite rugs, while fountains bubbled in inner courtyards adorned with palm trees and exotic flowers, creating a watery symphony that calmed the soul. The transition from the imminent danger of the blazing Sonoran to that sanctuary of luxury was so abrupt that her mind could barely process the change, oscillating between relief and a strange disorientation. She was led through corridors where silence was broken only by the soft rustle of fine fabrics and the distant murmur of voices, until she arrived at quarters that seemed to have sprung directly from a tale of a desert prince's abode, replete with promises of comfort and security. The room assigned to her was a spectacle in itself, a colossal bed with a silk canopy, drapes that filtered the golden light of the nascent sun, a bathroom with a tub that looked more like a private plunge pool, inviting a relaxing soak. Fine, scented garments, made of light fabrics and vibrant colors, awaited in a cedar wardrobe, and a lavish table laden with fresh fruits, exotic sweets, and natural juices was arranged, as if they knew exactly what her exhausted body and bewildered mind craved. At first, Audrey felt an overwhelming gratitude, which washed over her like a warm wave. It was like being rescued from hell and thrown into paradise, and her soul, still reeling from the near-fatal experience, embraced every comfort with the voraciousness of someone who had narrowly escaped certain death. She allowed herself a long, warm bath, feeling the accumulated tension of days in the desert drain from her body, and donned a soft cotton tunic that exuded a gentle oriental perfume, feeling for the first time in a long while truly safe. In the days that followed, the hospitality of the Blackwood estate was impeccable, bordering on perfection. She had at her disposal a team of discreet attendants, women with gentle smiles and silent movements, who attended to every need even before she realized she had it. The food was divine, an explosion of exotic flavors and aromatic spices that made her forget for a while her longing for the good old reliable comfort of her mother's homemade lasagna. Kalen visited her regularly, always with a formal posture and an air of unquestionable authority. But his eyes, those deep penetrating eyes that had fixed on her in the desert, studied her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable and at the same time strangely attracted, like a moth to a flame. He inquired about her well-being, about her sleep, about her desires, and every word, though uttered with an almost paternal gentleness, carried a subtext of control, a quest for information that disquieted her. He seemed to want to map every inch of her soul, to decipher every thought that crossed her mind. Gradually, however, the facade of generosity began to crack, revealing the subtle chains that bound her to that place. Audrey's first attempt to communicate with the outside world was to call her family in New York, to let them know she was alive and well, to calm the hearts she knew must be anxious. She asked one of the attendants for a phone, but was informed that the ranch's international communication system was experiencing technical difficulties at the moment, but that it would be resolved soon. A week later, the excuse changed to ranch security issues that required restriction on the use of external lines, a justification that sounded increasingly like a pretext. At first, Audrey tried to be understanding. After all, she was in a foreign place with its own rules and customs, but the repetition of excuses began to sound like a discordant, suspicious melody. Samuel Sam Vance, a man of serious countenance and refined ranch attire that commanded respect, was usually the one to deliver the news about the impossibility of contact. His voice was calm and measured, but his words were like rocks, unmoving and definitive. He explained that according to the sacred tenets of Blackwood hospitality and the Blackwood Legacy Covenant, a rescued and recovering guest was the Blackwood Patriarch's complete responsibility. Your safety and comfort are our utmost priority, Miss Thorne. Tradition dictates that you remain under our protection until you are fully recuperated, and conditions are ideal for your departure, he said, with a respect that bordered on excessive, almost robotic formality. Audrey knew that the desert culture valued hospitality, but this seemed to go far beyond what she understood as mere good manners. It felt more like a gilded cage than a gesture of pure kindness. She tried to argue, to explain that her family would be worried, that she was an adult, independent woman, accustomed to traveling alone and making her own decisions. But Sam merely nodded, his dark eyes impassive, and repeated that Kalen's word was law within his domain, and that her departure at that moment would be an affront to local customs, a grave disrespect that could not be tolerated. With each passing day, the feeling of confinement intensified. tightening in her chest. The Blackwood estate, once a fairy tale refuge, now seemed like a luxurious labyrinth from which she couldn't find an exit, no matter how hard she tried. She strolled through the lush gardens, admiring the stunning architecture and exotic birds, but the beauty couldn't erase the growing anguish in her soul. Freedom, for a New Yorker who so valued her autonomy and the ability to come and go as she pleased, was a non-negotiable right, and she felt it was being stolen from her. Kalen continued his silent vigilance, a constant shadow in her field of vision. He invited her to intimate dinners in the main hall, where conversation flowed with a strange mixture of formality and a veiled intimacy, as if unsaid secrets hung in the air. He questioned her about New York, about her life, her dreams, her deepest fears. Audrey, despite the suspicion that was beginning to sprout, found him fascinating, with an aura of mystery and power. His intelligence was undeniable, and the way his eyes gleamed when speaking of his people and his ranch was captivating, almost hypnotic. The opulence, however, did not lessen the feeling of being entangled in an invisible yet firmly woven web. Days melted into weeks, and the enforced cohabitation at the Blackwood estate, though luxurious, bore the heavy weight of a gilded cage. Audrey Thorne tried to maintain the pose of an independent adventurer, exploring the opulent gardens and libraries filled with ancient tomes, but Kalen Blackwood's shadow loomed over every corner. He was an impeccable host, attentive to her every wish, and with each passing moment she found herself studying him, trying to decipher the enigma behind that gaze that seemed to pierce her very soul. The physical attraction was a slow-burning, undeniable inferno, yet distrust remained a towering wall she refused to let crumble. One evening, after a dinner where conversation flowed with surprising naturalness, Kalen suggested a stroll. The full moon bathed the desert in a silvery light, and the air, previously warm, was now cool and imbued with the scent of jasmine and spices. They walked along a winding trail that led to a secret sanctuary of the estate, Blackwood Springs. Audrey had never imagined such beauty. A lake of crystal-clear waters reflected the slender palms and twinkling stars, while delicate lanterns hung from tree branches cast dancing shadows. It was a private paradise, a whispered sigh of tranquility amidst the opulence. They sat by the lake's edge, their bare feet touching the cool water. The silence was broken only by the gentle murmur of the spring and the distant croaking of frogs. Kalen, who typically maintained a regal composure and absolute control over his emotions, seemed to relax in that setting. His face, usually marked by an implacable seriousness, softened, and he turned to Audrey with a vulnerability she had never witnessed. "This place," he began, his voice lower and hoarser than usual, "was my family's sanctuary. My mother, my father, my little sister. We would spend hours here, far from the estate's formalities, just us." Audrey felt a shiver. The mention of his family was rare. Kalen was a closed book about his past, and she knew the loss of his lineage was a taboo among his advisors. She watched him, feeling that she was about to enter sacred, painful territory. "They're gone, Audrey," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, and for the first time she saw a shadow of profound grief in his eyes, a pain that went beyond mere longing. A flash flood and sudden sandstorm, one of those that come without warning, swallowing everything in its path in the blazing Sonoran. I was young, still a boy, but I already felt the weight of my destiny. I was on a diplomatic mission with my uncle in a neighboring territory. I returned to find nothing, only silence, emptiness. The desert had taken everything I loved. A knot formed in Audrey's throat. She, who had faced her own heartaches and romantic disillusionments, understood the devastation of irreparable loss. The image of Kalen, the powerful, unshakable leader, crumbled before her eyes, revealing a man torn apart by ancient trauma. It was like watching an HBO prestige drama unfold, where the most feared antagonist reveals a past of suffering that in some way justifies his actions. "Loneliness. It's a prison worse than any stone cell," he confessed, his gaze lost in the darkness of the lake. "Since then, I swore I would never feel that way again, that I would never lose those dear to me, that I would protect my people, my domain, and everything that is mine with my own life." Kalen's words echoed in the night air, and Audrey began to piece together the puzzle. The obsession with control, the reluctance to let her go, the intensity of his protection, all gained a new and somber meaning. It wasn't merely arrogance or possessiveness. It was a reflection of a scar that never healed, a primal fear of abandonment and losing again. She, who saw him as a potential captor, now saw a wounded man, desperately seeking to fill an existential void. A wave of empathy washed over her, shattering the barriers of her distrust. It was difficult to hate or resist someone who shared such raw pain. Calen Blackwood wasn't merely the authoritarian leader. He was an orphan of the desert, a survivor of a tragedy that shaped him in irreversible ways. The humanity beneath the facade of power was undeniable, and she saw it with a clarity few, perhaps no one, had ever possessed. She reached out, hesitant, and gently touched his arm. His skin was warm beneath her fingers, and he turned to her, surprised by the gesture. There were no words, only the touch, a silent bridge between their wounded souls. Calen looked at her, and something in his eyes ignited, not the burning desire she already knew, but a profound gratitude, an admiration for her ability to see beyond the armor he wore. You understand," he said, almost a question, but with a tone of relief. Audrey nodded, her eyes glistening. "I understand the pain of loss, Calen, and the need to protect what is precious." She couldn't say she understood the need to imprison someone, but the empathy she felt was genuine. It was a moment of authentic connection, a bond that transcended physical attraction and the situation of her captivity. In that Blackwood Springs, beneath the starry cloak of the desert, the complexity of their relationship deepened. Audrey was no longer merely the rescued adventurer. She was the woman who could see the wounded heart of the Blackwood patriarch. And Calen was no longer merely the powerful ruler. He was the man who dared to strip away his defenses before her. The attraction between them, once a wild and mysterious fire, now took deeper root, intertwining with understanding and vulnerability. She felt a tremor, not of fear but of a new and potent emotion, drawing her closer to him, into the labyrinth of his soul. It was a dangerous yet irresistible dance, and she knew in the deepest chambers of her heart that her life would never be the same. The overwhelming passion that bound her to Calen also opened a door to a universe of mysteries she was just beginning to decipher. It was as if, beyond his touch, she yearned to plunge into the very soul of that place, to understand the deep roots that shaped the man who had kidnapped her heart. Driven by this vibrant curiosity, and feeling a growing boredom with the luxurious yet isolated routine at the Blackwood estate, Audrey decided to explore the depths of that opulent kingdom. Her steps led her almost by instinct to the estate's vast library, a place Calen rarely frequented, absorbed in his duties as patriarch. As she opened the imposing doors, an intoxicating aroma of ancient parchments, aged wood, and millennial dust enveloped her, transporting her to another dimension. It was a sanctuary of knowledge, a labyrinth of ebony and cedar shelves, brimming with volumes bound in crafted leather, some detailed with gold and precious stones. Far from the digital books and instant news of her New York world, that place was a portal to history, a forgotten treasure. Audrey, always a devourer of stories and a free spirit, felt immediately drawn to that dusty universe, so different from the modern, tech-filled libraries she knew. She spent hours wandering the silent corridors, admiring the elaborate calligraphy of manuscripts, some so ancient they crumbled at the touch. There were maps of forgotten kingdoms, treatises on astronomy, Sufi poetry, and chronicles of legendary battles. It was a stark contrast to the streaming shows and celebrity gossip she consumed back in the city, a plunge into a culture that in many ways seemed to have halted in time. Her fingers glided across the spines of books, feeling the texture of time. Suddenly, a particularly dusty volume, almost hidden behind larger ones, caught her eye. It lacked the luster of the others, the luxurious adornments. It seemed a forgotten book, left aside, but its simplicity was what intrigued her most. Gently she pulled it from the shelf. The leather cover was dry and brittle, and the title, in ancient ornate script, was almost illegible to her modern English-speaking eyes. It was a book on the laws and traditions of the Blackwood Mesa Ranch, a compendium of rules that had governed the dynasty for centuries. Curious, Audrey settled into a worn velvet armchair, opening the tome with care, like one unveiling a secret. The yellowed pages smelled of the past, and the language was formal, almost poetic, filled with terms she didn't immediately comprehend. She leafed through the book, searching for something that could contextualize the life she was leading there, something that would explain the complexity of Kalen and his people. Then, her eyes stopped on a specific section, imperfectly mentally translated as the Blackwood Legacy Covenant. It was an enigmatic passage, written in a florid style that blended legality with mysticism. The text described an ancestral tradition that allowed the Blackwood patriarch, in specific circumstances, to claim the maternal rights to a child to ensure the continuity of the Blackwood lineage. More than that, it mentioned that if the mother was an outsider, without deep family ties within the dynasty's territory, the covenant could be invoked to ensure the offspring remained on the ranch, and by extension, the mother would be bound to that hallowed ground by the blood of her child. Audrey reread the passage multiple times, trying to decipher the true meaning behind the ornate words. To bind the desert's blood to the outsider's womb, to secure the lineage's eternity, the permanence of the progeny on hallowed ground. The description was vague, almost a dark poetry, and she couldn't grasp its full and sinister implication. It was like trying to understand an inside joke from a family you barely knew. But even without total clarity, a shiver ran down her spine, a chill that had nothing to do with the estate's powerful air conditioning. It was a premonition, a feeling that something heavy and ancient hung over her. It was as if the Sonoran breeze had carried a whisper of danger. In that instant, like a lightning bolt cleaving a clear blue sky, the conversations she had witnessed between Samuel Vance and Kalen echoed in her mind. The senior manager's words, always so concerned with traditions, with the importance of the lineage, with the future of the Blackwood Mesa Ranch, with the need for a strong heir to ensure the stability of the Blackwood dynasty. Vance, with his severe gaze and grave voice, always emphasized Kalen's responsibility to perpetuate the family name, especially after the tragedy that had claimed the patriarch's immediate family. Those words, once just fragments of conversations she paid little mind to, now took on a new and unsettling meaning. The seed of discomfort and suspicion was planted there in the silence of that ancient library. That dusty book, with its Blackwood Legacy Covenant, seemed like a macabre puzzle, and the pieces slowly began to click into place. It was a sensation that left her with a knot in her throat, a bad premonition. The overwhelming passion she felt for Kalen, which seemed so pure and intoxicating, suddenly gained a layer of intrigue, a veil of mystery that made her question everything. Could that love, which she believed to be the freest and most intense of her life, be anchored in something far older and more calculating? The idea was absurd, but the sense of alarm was real. She felt a bitter taste in her mouth, as if she had swallowed desert sand. Her mind, previously surrendered to the euphoria of romance, was now on high alert, trying to decipher the secrets Kalen Blackwood might be hiding behind his piercing eyes and ardent kisses. That love, which promised to be a refuge, now seemed to hold hidden traps. The chilling realization that her love was a gilded cage tightened around Audrey's chest, suffocating every last breath. Every embrace from Kalen, once a balm to her soul, now bore the crushing weight of an invisible chain, and the opulent grandeur of the Blackwood estate, once a captivating enchantment, had morphed into the stark panorama of her gilded prison. The walls, adorned with shimmering gold and rich tapestries, seemed to whisper ancient secrets, the unyielding tenets of the Blackwood Legacy Covenant that held her captive. She paced the vast, echoing halls, the silence amplifying her own gnawing confusion and the nascent fear that began to corrode her adventurous spirit. The news of her pregnancy, which should have been a beacon of unparalleled joy, was instead tainted by the bitter revelation of Kalen's meticulously laid plan, a truth that ripped away the silken veil of their passionate illusion. It was as if life itself, orchestrating a high-stakes HBO prestige drama, had played the cruelest trick, offering her love and freedom in the same intoxicating package, only to snatch away the latter without a whisper of warning. Audrey's profound anguish did not go unnoticed. Though Kalen strove to maintain the facade of an unshakable love, the discerning eyes of Samuel Vance, the ranch's senior manager, keenly registered the fading brilliance of the NYC adventurer. The counselor, a man forged from unwavering tradition, viewed Audrey's predicament with a complex mixture of concern and solemn resignation. To him, the Blackwood patriarch's will was paramount, and the arrival of an heir to the Blackwood dynasty was a blessing that transcended any fleeting moral quandaries. Yet, the world beyond the mesa did not share the same insulated, desert-bound perspective. Audrey's prolonged absence, a New York citizen far from home, began to generate whispers in distant diplomatic corridors, breaching the formidable boundaries of the blazing Sonoran and reaching the ears of her home country. Curious journalists were already weaving narratives about the mysteriously vanished adventurer, speculations that would soon crystallize into official concern. It was on a morning of oppressive heat, when the relentless Sonoran sun already scorched the Blackwood estate with its brazen golden rays, that the fateful news arrived. A federal agent, Special Agent Elena Rodriguez of the U.S. State Department, a sharp-suited woman whose impeccable attire and grave expression bespoke her serious intent, had landed at the Blackwood Mesa Ranch. She was no tourist in search of exoticism, but a direct representative of the U.S. government, dispatched to investigate Audrey's whereabouts and, if necessary, negotiate her release from the dynasty's formidable grip. Samuel Vance was the first to receive the delegation, his politeness precisely calculated, a man already bracing for the impending confrontation. Audrey, learning of the visit from one of the estate's domestic staff, felt an electrifying jolt course through her very being. It was a beacon of light at the end of the darkest tunnel she had ever traversed, a tangible chance to reclaim her freedom and, perhaps, her very identity, which seemed to have dissolved under the intense, possessive sway of Calen Blackwood. Her heart hammered, a frantic drum solo reverberating against her ribs. This is it, she thought, a wave of almost painful hope washing over her, threatening to overwhelm. She dressed in haste, selecting a light yet elegant gown, instinctively feeling the urgent need to project strength and unwavering autonomy. As she descended into the sprawling reception halls, the scene unfolding before her was ripped straight from a climactic TV series season finale. Calen Blackwood, imposing in his bespoke desert wear, greeted the agent with a cordiality that verged on thinly veiled dissimulation. Special Agent Rodriguez, her voice crisp and formal, introduced herself, her eyes, though polite, meticulously scrutinizing every detail of the opulent surroundings. "It is an honor to welcome you to the Blackwood Mesa Ranch," Calen said, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, yet was sufficiently convincing, gracing his lips. "I trust your journey was agreeable." Special Agent Rodriguez, for her part, cut directly to the chase. "Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate the hospitality. However, my visit has a very specific purpose. We are gravely concerned about the prolonged absence of Ms. Audrey Thorne, a U.S. citizen who, according to our records, should have returned to New York months ago." She cast a discerning glance towards Audrey, who had just entered the hall, a complex mixture of relief and cautious expectation clearly etched upon her face. Calen turned to Audrey, and for a fleeting instant their gazes locked. A silent message passed between them, a veiled warning understood. "Audrey, my desert rose, please join us. Special Agent Rodriguez has come a considerable distance to honor us with her presence." Audrey approached, acutely aware of the palpable weight of Calen's gaze upon her. "Special Agent Rodriguez, it's a pleasure to meet you. It's good to see a familiar face, as it were." Her voice, she noted, sounded far more composed than she felt. The agent gave a slight, acknowledging nod. "Miss Thorne, we've been very concerned. Your family in New York is distraught. We'd like to know if everything is all right and if there's anything we can do to facilitate your return home." Calen intervened smoothly, yet with an air of unyielding authority. "Special Agent Rodriguez, Miss Thorne is perfectly well. She is our esteemed guest, and by our sacred tradition of hospitality, she remains under our protection. Furthermore," he paused dramatically, his voice dropping to a concerned murmur, "Audrey's health has been rather delicate lately." He gazed at her with a feigned concern, his hand briefly touching hers, in a gesture that felt less like an endearment and more like a stark reminder. "She requires rest and extensive care, especially now. The blazing Sonoran can be unforgiving to those unaccustomed to its harsh realities, and a lengthy journey would be exceptionally dangerous for her. A cold shiver snaked down Audrey's spine. He was weaponizing her pregnancy, a truth she had discovered alone, and he had seemingly known all along, turning it into a cruel, unassailable shield. It was a crushing low blow, a swift checkmate that rendered her utterly speechless, utterly defenseless. The agent, visibly discomfited, attempted to counter. "I understand Mr. Blackwood's concern, but our State Department can provide all necessary medical support for a safe journey. We have resources." "With all due respect, Special Agent Rodriguez," Kalen interjected, his voice now imbued with an unyielding firmness, "no external resource can ever replace the unwavering protection and meticulous care she receives here, within the hallowed walls of the Blackwood estate, under my direct supervision. Our Blackwood traditions of hospitality are sacred, and a guest within our home is treated as an integral part of our family, especially someone as cherished as Audrey. To allow her to depart now would be a profound violation of our customs and would recklessly endanger her fragile health. I cannot and will not permit it." Samuel Vance, who had observed the entire tense scene in stoic silence, nodded gravely, his gesture emphatically reinforcing the undeniable legitimacy of Kalen Blackwood's words. Special Agent Rodriguez's face tightened with undisguised frustration. She was a woman of international law, of intricate protocols and delicate negotiations, but here, in the secluded heart of the Blackwood Mesa Ranch, Kalen's will reigned supreme, and the ancient Blackwood traditions were unyielding, unbreakable barriers. She knew that, diplomatically, she possessed no legal leverage to directly intervene against Kalen's formidable will without precipitating an international incident of massive proportions, a diplomatic quagmire her government would never sanction. "I understand your position, Mr. Blackwood," the agent conceded, her voice tinged with the bitter taste of defeat. The perplexity hung in the air of the estate, thick as the desert's oppressive heat. Special Agent Elena Rodriguez's voice, heavy with frustration, still echoed in Audrey's ears as she watched Kalen with a mix of growing fascination and a persistent unease settling deep in her chest. She felt like a pawn on a chessboard, with Kalen the master player, but something in his bearing, in his deep-set eyes, began to challenge that very perception. It wasn't long before the complexity of the Blackwood Mesa Ranch revealed itself more palpably. A crisis arose, involving a critical water shortage, a vital resource disputed between two neighboring ranching families who depended on the same seasonal spring. The tension was palpable, threatening to explode into outright conflict. Kalen, instead of using brute force or his undeniable authority, summoned the ranch patriarchs to the Blackwood estate, seating them in a circle, with Audrey observing from a distance, curious and apprehensive. Kalen Blackwood, with his imposing posture yet calm voice, listened to each party, allowing their anger and pain to be fully expressed. He didn't interrupt them. He merely absorbed their words, his eyes fixed and weighted with thought. Audrey expected an authoritarian decree, but what followed truly surprised her. Kalen proposed a solution that didn't solely benefit one side, but demanded sacrifices from both, ensuring the sustainability of the spring and peaceful coexistence. He cited ancient traditions of the desert and Arizona water laws, but interpreted them with a wisdom that transcended rigidity, focusing on compassion and social justice. He spoke of the unity of the people, the strength of community, and the future of their children. Audrey watched as the initially skeptical elders slowly nodded, the tension visibly dissipating. The crisis was resolved not with an imposition, but with an agreement forged in equity. Kalen was not just a powerful landowner, he was a leader, a true shepherd to his flock. Admiration bloomed in Audrey's chest, an unexpected flower amidst her skepticism. She had seen him as a manipulator, yes, but now she also glimpsed the man behind the immense wealth and power, a man profoundly committed to his people, a figure who took the immense burden of his legacy as the Blackwood patriarch with solemn gravity. It was like watching an episode of a primetime TV drama, where the antagonist suddenly reveals a heart-wrenchingly human side. This new perspective tore a fissure in her defenses, The physical attraction, which had always been a smoldering ember, became undeniable, a wildfire threatening to consume any shred of her rationality. Kaylin's gaze, once merely penetrating, now seemed to carry a promise, a silent invitation that Audrey, despite herself, felt compelled to accept. Casual touches on hands, on arms, lingered, charged with a meaning that transcended mere etiquette. Each encounter, each conversation, was a delicate dance of seduction and resistance. Kaylin, keenly aware of Audrey's vulnerability and the unfolding of his plan, intensified his pursuit. His charisma, once a tool of power, transformed into a weapon of conquest. He courted her with the intensity of a desert king from a sweeping romance novel, yet with the modernity and astuteness of a 21st century man. He recounted stories of his people, of his childhood in the blazing Sonoran, of his dreams for the Blackwood legacy, revealing layers of his soul that Audrey never expected to find. He took her on nightly horseback rides beneath the shimmering stars, to intimate dinners where the cuisine was as exotic as the environment, and to conversations that stretched into the early hours, where the cultural barrier seemed to vanish. Their all-consuming passion found its sanctuary at Blackwood Springs. Far from the curious eyes of the estate, beneath the canopy of whispering cottonwoods and the murmur of flowing water, they surrendered to each other. There, Audrey's skin burned under Kaylin's touch, their lips met in breath-stealing kisses, and their bodies intertwined in an ancient primal dance. Each encounter was an explosion of senses, a deep, enthralling connection that seemed to transcend time and space. Audrey felt utterly torn, like the protagonist of a prestige HBO drama, caught between the distrust that warned her of Kaylin's intentions and the undeniable attraction that pulled her towards him with a magnetic force. She was hopelessly entangled, her mind screaming caution while her heart screamed for more. It was on one of these mornings after a night of intense passion at Blackwood Springs that reality crashed down on Audrey like an emotional avalanche, a persistent malaise, an aversion to certain smells, an unusual fatigue. At first she tried to ignore it, attributing it to stress and the change in routine. But the stubborn truth asserted itself. In a discreet examination arranged by Kaylin, which she initially believed to be out of genuine concern, the estate's resident physician confirmed Audrey was pregnant. The very ground beneath her feet seemed to dissolve. A child, his child. One part of her filled with an overwhelming love and joy, a maternal instinct she didn't know she possessed. But the other part, the part that still held on to suspicion, began to connect the dots. The revelation of his plan came brutally. As she recovered from the shock of the pregnancy, Audrey, on one of her strolls through the Blackwood estate, overheard a conversation between Kaylin and Sam Vance. The words were in a hushed, intense tone, but some phrases, repeated and emphasized, she had already learned. Child, Blackwood legacy covenant, cannot leave, Blackwood dynasty. The veil was ripped from her eyes. The rescue, the courtship, the intense seduction, the all-consuming passion. Everything fit together like pieces of a macabre puzzle. Admiration transformed into bitterness, passion into betrayal. He didn't want her out of love, but to keep her imprisoned, so her child would secure her permanence. Kaylin, the man she was beginning to love, was a cold manipulator, and she a mere tool in his game of power. The pain of disillusionment was as physically debilitating as her morning sickness. Audrey confronted Kaylin, her voice choked with rage and sorrow. The words were uttered amidst tears and accusations. Kaylin, caught in his own web, tried to justify himself, but his excuses sounded hollow given the magnitude of his manipulation. Before they could resolve the impasse, the desert, as if mirroring the chaos in their hearts, erupted in fury. A super dust storm, a haboob, deadly and all-consuming, began to lash the Blackwood Mesa ranch. The sky morphed into an infernal orange, the wind howled like a banshee, and fine sand penetrated everywhere. Audrey, in her desperation, tried to flee no matter where, just away from that nightmare. She ran out of the estate, blinded by tears and sand. Kaylin, seeing her vanish into the storm's fury, felt a cold panic grip him. The plan, the power, everything lost its meaning. The only thing that mattered was Audrey and the child she carried. He loved her, he realized, a love that transcended his initial obsession, a real and overwhelming love. Without a second thought, Kaelin plunged into the storm, ignoring Sam Vance's pleas and the ferocity of the elements. The sand lashed his skin, the wind threatened to knock him down, but he persisted, calling her name. He found her, fallen, disoriented, about to be swallowed by the shifting, treacherous sands. With a strength born of desperation and love, he rescued her, carrying her back to the estate, battling raging nature. He protected her with his own body, inhaling sand, suffering cuts and scrapes, but never letting her go for a second. When the storm finally subsided, leaving a trail of destruction, Kaelin and Audrey were exhausted but safe in each other's arms. Their eyes met, and there were no more lies, only the raw, unvarnished truth of their emotions. He had risked his life for her, for them. In that moment, he proved that the love he felt was real, that the passion that bound them was not just a tool, but a genuine force. Kaelin, his voice raspy with sand and emotion, begged for forgiveness, not just for his plan, but for his lack of faith in true love. He promised Audrey that she would be free to go or to stay, that the Blackwood legacy covenant would not be used against her, that their child would be born of true love and her own choice. He was willing to relinquish his pride, his control for her. Audrey, looking at Kaelin before her, the man who had rescued her twice from the unforgiving desert, saw not the manipulator, but the man who loved her, with all his flaws and his redemption. The love, that initial spark that had ignited into something far more profound, was complex, born in tortuous circumstances, but it was real. She forgave him, not because she had to, but because she loved him too. She chose to stay, not out of obligation, but for a love that had survived betrayal and the fury of nature. Together, they began to rebuild not only the Blackwood Empire after the storm, but also the foundation of their relationship, brick by brick, with honesty and trust. Kaelin, with Audrey's support, began to revise some of the more restrictive traditions of the Blackwood dynasty, seeking a balance between tradition and modernity, ensuring that justice was always accompanied by compassion. Audrey, in turn, found her freedom not in escape, but in the choice to love and build a family in a place that became her home, alongside the Blackwood patriarch who, from a manipulator, transformed into her great love. The story of Kaelin and Audrey teaches us that love can emerge in the most unexpected places and in the most improbable circumstances. It shows that redemption is possible, that a heart can change, and that true freedom lies in the ability to choose one's own destiny, even when it intertwines with another's. It's an emotional roller coaster, a true primetime TV series finale that hooks us from beginning to end. So what did you think of this desert twist? Did Kaelin Blackwood deserve Audrey's forgiveness? Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more stories full of passion and emotion, and tell me in the comments, would you forgive the Blackwood patriarch after everything? We'll see you in the next video.